Story 1. I was briefly employed at Hooters for about 6 months a decade ago while I was in college. The uniform was uncomfortable, mostly because of the weather, and with it being the baseball playoffs and football season, the clientele could get pretty rowdy and the comments could be unpleasant, but the tips made up for it. I waited tables for a long time, and I have never made that much money consistently. I am talking about $500 on a Tuesday, and I was the first cut. Story 2. I worked at Twin Peaks. It was strange. We were not allowed to order from the customer menu and had to order from a spa menu that featured very low-calorie options. I also had my pay docked once because my hair was not glam enough. I had straightened it instead of curling it that day. I am not sure how I got the job because they only had one size of shorts to try on during the interview, and they were about 3 sizes too small. Story 3. I worked at Hooters as a dishwasher and later as a fry cook. The uniform was a Hooters t-shirt. It would get soaked with sweat from the radiating heat of 7 or more deep fryers, caked with flour and raw chicken from breading the wings, and by the end of an 8-hour shift I looked more like a breaded chicken wing than a 17-year-old male. I did not get laid. Story 4. I worked for a private catering company in college. We dressed professionally provocative and served food to wealthy people who were members of a private beach club. Comments were outrageous, but the tips were generous. There were also many swingers, and wow, the drama was amazing. Story 5. I worked at Hooters part-time. It was kind of like a minefield, but you could get substantial tips if you had regular customers. Story 6. I worked briefly at a place with Velcro Scottish skirts. I am attractive, but my friend, who was a Helen of Troy, got me the job. I had recently lost my first post-college job in my field. Despite the Scottish theme, the boss must not have liked redheads because I was the only one and I was given a skirt nearly twice as long as the other girls. At the time, I was pretty self-conscious about that. I would put the skirt on and sing the line "I went to college" every day. I ended up chatting with a customer who ultimately hired me back into my actual career, where I have since been successful. Story 7. I worked at Hooters for about a year and a half when I was between college and medical school and during part of medical school. Part of the uniform was thick brown leggings, so honestly it felt more like wearing a tank top with leggings and shorts over that. I will say they run a tight ship. I cannot speak to any of the franchises. A restaurant could be either, but Hooters of America has very high standards for their waitresses. When I picked up a shift at a local independent restaurant my husband worked at while I was a resident, I made fantastic money compared to what I was used to making as a resident and was mentioned in a Google review. People were sometimes really mean, more than they were pervy. A non-insignificant number of men seemed to want to be mean as some sort of revenge against the hot girl from their high school, but I was not the hot girl from their high school. I actually applied for the job because I was so shy I had trouble talking to people, and I decided to fix it by being thrown into the deep end. People were also very condescending and acted like we were extremely stupid, but most of the girls were great local college students. I think the saddest I have ever seen anyone was when I told a man wearing a Phi Beta Kappa pin, "Oh, I am a member of that." Edit. I was also surprised it was much more family-friendly than I had expected. Hooters' ideal is the girl next door, so you can only have natural hair colors, 2 lobe piercings in each ear. This rule was enforced less strictly than some of the others, especially since you have to wear your hair down. Tattoos must be covered, and I had to give up my nose stud during my year and a half. There are coloring pages, hula hoops, and other things for kids to play with, and honestly it is a bunch of college girls, so any baby or child brought in is the star of the restaurant because everyone wants to play with them. We once had a 12-year-old girl making beaded bracelets at one table, and I think every single girl stopped by to ask about it and see what she was doing. I would say it is somewhere I would be totally fine and happy to bring my kids, especially because it is supposed to be chaotic in there and no one cares about kids dropping fries on the floor. One woman I saw there fairly regularly, I think, was a caseworker for Child Protective Services and would bring children there for lunch for their check-in. I actually think it is a great idea because if they had a history of being sexually abused by an older man, Hooters is a pretty safe place as a public space with all the workers around you being young women. Story 8. I worked at the Tilted Kilt when I was 18. I made great money compared to my college peers, but that was about the only positive from the experience. The customers were gross, but I expected that. The worst part for me was the other girls. I was very fit and attractive at the time, and attractiveness determined things like which section you got at work, so the other attractive girls were in constant catty competition. I was severely bullied. It got so bad that one of them drugged me at a party because she thought it was funny. Then they drugged another girl at work because they were mad at her, and the police were called after she made a scene. Story 9. I was not a woman. I worked a packed college bar at a beer tub beside women in sleazy outfits. Mostly we stood behind the tub of ice and served beer. My job was twofold: provide the female crowd with a sleazy male option and act as a sort of big brother to the servers so the men would keep it moving and not talk to them too long. I am 6 feet 5 inches, so it was not difficult. It was fun, wild, usually easy, and lucrative. I made about $275 to $400 a night, and the women almost always cleared $400. Competition for working the tub was stiff because you did not have to deal with 80% of the problems bartenders face. Another challenge was keeping it professional with coworkers. We were drunk, dancing, and having a blast, so things quickly got flirty. I drew a line to keep it from getting too personal. The money was too easy to risk. The craziest part was the amount of money I found on the floor. I always split it with whoever worked beside me. Several times I found rolls of cash, even $3,200 on one occasion. I had to put hands on guys twice because of harassment. I was fired by the manager when he hired his son and tried to pass him off as some guy he did not know. The women found out and told the owner, and I was rehired. Typical shady bar managers. It was a wild ride and some of the best times in my life. The main thing was moderation and policing personal desires. It is difficult at a young age, but it paid off later. Story 10. I worked at Hooters for 2 years, my freshman and sophomore years of college. I went through their trainer program and taught other servers how to do the job too. I look back on it as one of the most formative experiences of my life. I had close relationships with so many of the women I worked with. It was like being in a sorority but better because we made money. I learned the hustle, how to put on a face, bring the energy, tap into confidence, and control conversation. I also learned to be firm about boundaries. I gained many interpersonal skills that I still use today. The money was really good. I was able to support myself through college, and I had a lot of fun getting to know the various people who came in. As a Hooters server, you could rest a cheek on a stool and chat for a while. There were people from all walks of life and not nearly as many creeps as you might imagine, at least outwardly. The only major creep I had was a much older man who asked me to come close and then whispered in my ear, wondering what type of underwear I had on. It definitely gave me the ick, but my male manager took over serving the table and that was that. There was also some nonsense. I apparently wasn't skinny enough at the time to wear a crop top, a decision made by management, and I spent a lot of time worried about my weight. I will probably never be as thin as I was then, but I didn't know it at the time. You also had to have your hair, nails, and makeup approved before a shift. Now, I rarely do my hair, nails, or makeup, and I never regret it. I also never wear pantyhose after 2 years of that. I do want to add, though, that at least for Hooters the outfits were form-fitting but, to me, really only gave the illusion of looking skimpy. We were covered from toes to chest. It actually felt modest aside from the obvious cleavage. I ultimately left because management compromised my safety by providing my phone number to a customer. It was dramatic and I probably should have sued, but I didn't know then what I know now. Ultimately, though, I wouldn't change a thing and would not be the person I am without that experience. Note: I hated all-you-can-eat wings night, and there was a time management wouldn't let me leave when I was sick on an Ultimate Fighting Championship fight night, and I hated that too. Story 11. I worked at Hooters while in college. Before that, I worked at Texas Roadhouse and at a fine dining restaurant, and later at a real estate office with an abusive boss. After those jobs, Hooters was a walk in the park. There was no balancing heavy plates on large trays at Texas Roadhouse, no pressure to open and properly serve wine at the fine dining restaurant, and no getting yelled at first thing in the morning as a real estate assistant. It was casual, fun, and easy. I worked mostly daytime shifts, which were much tamer than the night shifts. If you ever need a good pair of tights, Hooters tights are amazing. They were sold in the bathroom for $4. I hate tights, but those are great. Story 12. I was one of the first women hired as a general manager at Hooters in the early 1990s. They needed me when Hooters was sued by men for discrimination, and they wanted it to appear that women held management positions when 60 Minutes came to interview them. When managers interviewed women applicants, they would circle a letter in the word employment on the application. If they rated her a 1, they would circle the E. If they rated her a 10, they would circle the T. Story 13, here we go. I worked at Hooters during my senior year of high school. Truthfully, I only enjoyed wearing the outfit and the attention. I was thin, blonde, and attractive, but I did not make the kind of money I am reading about in this thread. Probably because, comparatively, I was a bitch and refused to schmooze or entertain the creepy comments. I loved when families or groups of girls would come in so I could breathe a little bit. Here are a few tidbits. 1. I never had any regulars, but when a regular would sit in my section, the other girls would get jealous and hang around the table looking for money. 2. A girl stole my tips for the night from my waistband wallet in the bathroom when we were closed. The manager was very apologetic and knew who did it, but I never got my money back. 3. The loaded tater tots got me through. 4. 2 creepy men sat in my section once and were overly interested in asking me personal questions. It turned into them telling me about a trip they were going on in a couple weeks to Thailand and how much fun they have, how they wanted me to come and that I could bring a friend, and that they would pay for everything. I am pretty sure they were trying to sell me into sex trafficking, to be honest. 5. Endless comments about your ass, your breasts, your abs, your favorite sex position, the usual. It made me see myself differently at 18. I was not used to that kind of attention from grown men. I lasted about 4 to 5 months before I decided I could not handle it. I did not have the resilience, and I am about as flirtatious as Aubrey Plaza. I would make about $125 to $150 a night. It was not really worth it, and, personally, I felt weird telling my friends and family. Story 14. My best friend worked at Hooters for a year. She said the uniform was uncomfortable in Canadian winters and the clientele could be problematic, but the tips were excellent. The most she made in one night was about $450. She quit because she was fed up with being subjected to unwanted touching. Story 15. I worked at Hooters at a beach location for 2 summers. The managers were creepy men who tried to get sexual favors from the waitresses and made derogatory comments. Once we had an after-work party and one of the kitchen staff drove me home. The next morning at our daily startup meeting, someone asked me in front of everyone, "He gave you a ride home and you could not even give him a hand job?" The place was almost always packed and sometimes had a 2-hour wait. I did not mind the uniforms because I was young and in the prime of my life. I felt confident and attractive. I made a lot of money and those summers were fun. Overall, the customers were a mix of families, teenagers, and some men, but the management was worse than any customer. Story 16. I worked at Hooters when I was 18. I made a lot of money. Our manager did not play. If a customer stepped out of line, they were escorted out. I had a few creeps, but people were well behaved for the most part. It was a fun place to work. Most of the girls were nice. Our general manager was kind of a jerk. Once he asked if I was going to put any makeup on. I told him I already had it on. He blinked slowly and repeated the question, so I went to put more on. If a girl wanted to apply, we had to get our manager, and she decided whether to hire based on appearance. Story 17. There were many inappropriate comments. I stayed there for a week before I decided it was not a good idea. I expected this, but I was surprised by how often the comments occurred and how blunt they were. Story 18. I used to frequent a Twin Peaks in Dallas because it was the only restaurant within walking distance. I was from the United Kingdom and did not drive. I kept going because I recruited their staff. They were excellent salespeople. They had learned on the job and knew how to get what they wanted. Eventually, I was banned from entering because we hired 6 or 7 of them over the course of a year. Story 19. I worked as a waitress in a strip club. I wore a skirt with the logo on the back and could wear any black or white top I wanted. It was fun. The bouncers had my back, so I felt very safe. Only one man actually slapped my butt. I knew him, so I called him out myself. For the town I was in, the tips were good. It was an easy job, and a lot of fun. I didn't mind it at all. except that I worked every Thursday through Saturday. The music was not too loud, and it was warm inside. You need to be the right kind of person to do this job, but if you are, it's great. I don't drink or use drugs, so it worked for me. The wrong person can get caught up in trouble. No regrets. Story 20. I worked at Hooters and Twin Peaks for a couple of years each, from age 18 to 23. We had a blast. My coworkers became very close friends, and we befriended several regulars. Some customers were unpleasant, but the tips more than made up for it. I was able to pay my way through college. Story 21. Working at Hooters during college was a mixed experience. The part-time shifts were financially rewarding. I earned more than my roommate who worked nearly full-time at a steakhouse. We had many regular customers, though in hindsight some exhibited unsettling behavior. The uniform, with leggings under the shorts, provided more coverage than it appeared and made me feel more comfortable. However, the environment promoted an unhealthy relationship with food and body image. Despite maintaining a weight of 115 pounds, there was constant pressure to be thinner and more attractive, creating a competitive atmosphere among colleagues. For my well-being, I transitioned to bartending at a local bar. Story 22. I worked at Hooters for 7 years, starting in 2003. A college friend worked there and got me the job. I was a poor student trying to pay my way, so I accepted. I was young and wore a lot less. In those years, I met some amazing women and some of the worst. The staff generally fell into 3 types: the hustler, the single mother, and the train wreck. At my best, I could make $2,000 in a week in about 3 days. I also worked theme nights on double shifts. Because I took themes seriously, I built a regular clientele and sometimes earned $1,000 in a single night. By seriously, I mean I treated my costumes like Halloween and went all out, often making them by hand. I competed in a few pageants and became a certified trainer for 3 locations in my area. I entered that business shy and reserved. When I did my first birthday song, I remember being put on a chair, my face going bright red, and panic setting in. Being the center of attention shouting to a full restaurant was terrifying. By the time I left, I was highly confident and could talk to anyone about anything to strike up conversation and connection. That skill set served me well later in life, up to vice president at multi-billion-dollar companies. In 7 years, I had 1 bad interaction with a customer and my manager handled it immediately by ejecting the person. I formed some of my best friendships with coworkers. About half used the job as a stepping stone to other careers. The other half stayed in similar roles. I never treated the job as a place to flirt. It was a place to network. My main location was family-oriented. We saw many husbands and wives with their children. Overall, I had a great experience. I met many businessmen who gave me helpful advice, including lawyers and judges who helped me avoid jury duty. People helped me fix my car for little or no cost, helped me get internships, and gave me side gigs at golf courses. I got to sing, which was my favorite thing, and I earned extra tips singing at tables. I never felt uncomfortable or mistreated, and I made lasting friendships. Was there drama? Definitely, but I mostly stayed away from it. Are the image standards strict? Yes, but that is what you sign up for. For me, the standards helped me stay in shape as a college student and motivated me to maintain my appearance. I learned a lot about makeup and hair that has continued to improve. I did not drink much because I wanted to look good and make money. Are there creeps? 1000%. Many hung out at the bar daily. I learned how to manage myself with them. Some were dangerous and to be avoided. Others were just cringeworthy or annoying. Overall, I would do it again if I could go back in time. I do not know if I would do it in today's world because human behavior seems very different now. Story 23. A friend worked as a Hooters waitress for about 2 years. She said on slow nights she made around $250 to $300 in tips. And on weekends it was common to make $800 to $1,000 in tips. One of the more popular waitresses was making more than that but was fired for adding $1 to every receipt when a customer paid by credit card. She had been doing it for years until one customer noticed and reported it to management. Story 24. I worked at Twin Peaks. I knew what I was getting myself into. Before each shift you were graded on your hair, makeup, nails, tan, and fitness. The women with the best grades got to pick their sections first, and grades were posted in the back for everyone to see. I could tell it really affected some of them. I worked there for 6 months to save a down payment on a house. Then I left. Story 25. I worked at Hooters for about a year from 2012 to 2013. I know a lot of people rag on it, but it was actually one of my favorite jobs. The regulars came almost every day and were like family. Most attended my graduation party, and all gave me cash gifts in addition to generous tips. The clientele otherwise was not that bad. You have a few bad apples, but management did not tolerate rude behavior, which was probably helped by having 2 female managers and 1 male manager. My favorite part was the women I worked with. It felt like a sorority or alliance. We had each other's backs, and going to work was so much fun. We danced, spun on stools, and sang. The tips were absurd. I lived in the Midwest and earned anywhere from $300 to $1,000 a night, depending on my share and the day of the week. The location where I worked closed abruptly, but I still keep in touch with several women more than 10 years later. There was one older couple who were regulars. They both sadly passed away, and every woman who had ever worked at that location attended both funerals. Places like that are what you make them, and having a supportive management team that has your back matters. Story 26. I worked at Hooters about 15 years ago. From what I can tell, the uniforms were more conservative then. Tights, short shorts, and a tank top, so I never felt they were too revealing. My experience there was mixed, but I made great money without doing any side work. Story 27. In my early 20s, I worked at a bar that pretended it was not one of those places, but it was. We had to wear shorts and mini skirts and cropped polo shirts. The other servers were great and the money was good. The uniform did not bother me that much except in winter. Eventually, I ended up with a stalker, and that pushed me to move on to something better. Story 28. A friend had regular customers at Hooters who always tipped well. They befriended her and invited her to the casino. They would give her about $1,000 to gamble with. She developed a serious gambling problem playing with their free money and began losing all of her own savings. Story 29. I worked at a nightclub doing bottle service for a decade. Summers were outdoors, and the uniform was a bikini top and short bottoms. Surprisingly, people were focused on themselves and enjoying their time, so comments were not excessive and the pay was very good. The job taught me how to deal with a myriad of people from different economic backgrounds and with varied personalities. I agree with a previous commenter. Do not get used to the fast money. Save, avoid drugs, and you will be fine. Story 30. I briefly worked at both Hooters and Tilted Kilt from about age 20 to 22. I had just been through a breakup that hurt my self-esteem, and I wanted to feel empowered and validated by my appearance. I also had a lot of friends who worked at both places. Hooters was not bad for my short stint. Many families went there. I recall only 2 borderline inappropriate comments. The older male manager was very strict and would fire you for the smallest infraction. I quit because they scheduled me on a day I had class and expected me to cover it. Tilted Kilt was much worse, mostly because of hostile managers. A table walked out and they made me pay for it and threatened to fire me if I objected. I had a slip and fall, and the manager on duty tried to influence what I wrote in my incident report. The shoes they required were dance shoes that hurt my feet so badly the first week my feet felt like they were bleeding. Staff made me feel like I owed a man a drink after my shift just because he tipped me well. They pressured me to do so, and I complied. He had a glass eye and kept trying to get my phone number. I was barely 22 and had a hard time standing up for myself. I left soon after. A father at a large table of dads and young boys asked me if I liked sex. I was shocked and asked if he spoke to everyone like that. He said no. I should have told management, although they did not care much about the women. Older men, roughly 45 and up, were the most inappropriate. I quit after a couple of months. For what it is worth, I worked at many restaurants and it did not matter what the environment was. Whether a restaurant, sports bar, or fine dining, creeps were everywhere and managers typically did not stand up for their staff. At one sports bar, a drunk man grabbed himself and was about to unzip and flash me. I ran off and told the manager, and she said she did not care and told me to run the drinks. I walked out. I do not miss the industry. Story 31. I worked as a cook at Hooters. These were the most common complaints I heard and issues I witnessed from servers. The temperature. A lot of their free time was spent around the heat lamp at the serving window trying to warm up. One weird customer who kept trying to buy sexual favors and underwear. A list of disgusting sexual behaviors from customers that, according to corporate policy, are not considered harassment. Having to pay for their own makeup even though being glamorous at all times was a company requirement. Not sure if this was unique to our store, but no server was allowed to walk to their car alone after a shift. A male coworker had to accompany them. Stalking definitely happened. Sleazy cooks who would ignore tickets so they could hit on their coworkers. Customers who kept demanding their time, then did not tip. In this state, servers are paid $2.13 per hour, so tips are essentially their whole paycheck. I was frustrated working there. It is so easy to make a good burger or a decent plate of wings, but nobody in the back of house cared. I eventually quit because I got tired of working all 3 stations alone while the fry cook hid in the office playing on his Nintendo Switch. It was not all bad. I had a lot of kitchen experience in much more upscale places before this, so I would occasionally cook nicer food for everybody, which brought me a lot of joy. I was close with most of the servers, and working around friends was nice. Story 32. I am male but was a fry cook at Hooters. Most of the women I worked with were not attractive, but they wore the outfits well. Story 33. I liked working at Hooters. The uniform consisted of thick tan tights that I have continued to wear in my personal life more than 5 years later. They were inexpensive, durable, and attractive. Story 34. Worked at an edgier Hooters adjacent concept. Black, low-cut polos, ripped denim shorts, and Converse. At one point, the servers had trading cards you could hand out so people could come in and ask for you specifically. The expectation was that if you weren't actively running food or drinks, you spent time talking to your tables. I had a great time, made many friends, and only dealt with a few creepy customers. Several coworkers were given cars by regulars. It was pretty wild. I think the concept has now pivoted to allow men to serve as well and has moved away from the Hooters and Winghouse vibes. Story 35. I worked at Twin Peaks for 3 months and made a large amount of money, $300 to $500 every shift, with $100 tips sometimes for the first tables. It was good money but a horrible atmosphere. The location I worked at was huge, like a grocery store, and every morning they lined us up to decide who received the best tables. To get the job, they had me try on the uniform and spin slowly in front of the managers and cooks. The prettier and more made up you were, the better the tables. It also depended on how much you made the night before. Your hair, nails, skin, and makeup needed to be on point. For lunch, we had a limited staff menu of salmon and greens or chicken. Very plain food. We could not order from the regular menu unless the cooks liked you. Overall, it was really good money, but management was disgusting. Many of them were sleeping with each other. Corporate behavior was no better, grabbing women and commenting on their appearance. Besides being treated like a prize animal at the 4-H youth program, you did make a lot of money. One day I will spill all the beans on a podcast because it was far worse than this. Story 36. I made very good money. Most customers were pleasant. I still keep in touch with some of them. I became well known on Instagram. Story 37. My buddy's girlfriend started working at Hooters when she was 19. I told him it was a bad idea. After 2 months, she had several sugar daddies in their 40s and 50s who were paying her for sex. She was making about $25,000 a month. She quit Hooters and kept the sugar daddies for about 6 months. She started drinking heavily and became pregnant by my buddy. As far as I know, they broke up. I'm not sure what happened to her. It was sad but predictable. Story 38. I am a straight man who worked as a bartender in a gay nightclub in the 1980s. I was young and hired for my looks, wearing tight shorts and tank tops every shift. Customers were easy to handle. For every proposition, I simply said I was with someone. The managers were harder. They knew I was straight but were always on me, saying things like just try it or just lie there and I will do all the work. Guys are guys. Story 39. I had a coworker who was a regular at a place in Virginia and would brag about all his girlfriends. He was an overweight 60-year-old man, but he had a lot of money and no wife. He showed me nude photos the women sent him and claimed he was sleeping with them, but I was skeptical. Who knows? Story 40. I am a once-and-done customer. Many years ago, I flew into Florida on a business trip and the others wanted to go there for lunch. Our waitress was a beautiful blonde, well-built and confidently wearing her uniform. After her shift, I watched her go outside, take her hair down, cover her clothing and downplay her appearance, then board a bus. She projected an image at work that was not consistent with her personal life. It felt exploitative and uncomfortable, and I refused to ever enter another such establishment. Story 41. I went to a Hooters in Nairobi, Kenya. Only male waiters worked there, but they did wear t-shirts. The place was packed. Story 42. I worked at Hooters in 2004, and my best friend forever worked there from 2002 to 2005. It was considered cool at the time during the peak of early 2000s misogyny. Now Hooters seems cringy and run down, and all the locations in my city have closed. My favorite part of the job was getting to know the other Hooters servers. They were strong, resourceful women who have gone on to lead successful lives. Some of them knew how to work the system and were able to find sugar daddies who essentially paid their bills. I had fun with the staff, but ultimately did not like always having to be so fake with customers. As for tips, yes, they were good, but not any better than what I have made bartending at a dive bar or waitressing in casual fine dining. In my experience, they were not worth the pervy behavior from customers and managers. After I quit, I made a good bit of money selling all my uniforms on eBay. Story 43. I worked at Twin Peaks for about 6 months and mostly hated it. I didn't mind wearing the regular uniform, but wearing lingerie on Wednesdays and holidays was awful, especially because customers would bring their children. I was 22 when I worked there, and many men asked my age and were disappointed that I was not younger, which felt very uncomfortable. Some men felt entitled to my attention while planning to tip only $10. Many claimed to be going through a divorce, tipped poorly, and left their number. I know those customers are not representative of all men, but the experience negatively affected my perception of men. Story 44. I bartended at a place where all the women wore very low-cut tops. I was taking home $500 to $1,000 after each shift in tips. You definitely had to work for that money. You had to put up with many men making suggestive comments or blatantly hitting on you. Security would walk us to our cars because we had serious incidents of customers waiting for female staff after shifts. I went by a nickname rather than my real name. I would say I was seeing someone whenever asked because being single was an invitation, and saying I was in a relationship would have killed my tips. Story 45. Working at Hooters feels like getting paid to be sexually harassed all day. Make misogyny work for you, I guess. Story 46. I went to Singapore on a work trip. There was a festival and most restaurants were packed, but Hooters was 2/3 empty. We shrugged, agreed to go in, had wings and beers, and chatted with the servers. They seemed surprised that we knew of Hooters. Some staff did not realize it was a United States chain. It was very fun and would probably be a go-to if I were a homesick United States expatriate. Story 47. I worked for about 6 months while in college in a big sports town. Some customers were great sports fans who came for cheap wings and beer. Others were awful. One customer became angry when I refused to serve him because he was very drunk. He started dropping things, demanded that I bend over to pick them up, and dumped ranch dressing all over the table when I would not comply. Servers could bully each other. A few used remarkable flirting to earn huge tips, $400 to $500 on some nights. I never learned that hustle, but some servers did extremely well. Kitchen staff would sometimes sexually harass servers, or they would move heaven and earth to help with fast orders if they thought you were a fellow hard worker. It was the best waitressing training I ever received. It taught me a lot about attention to detail and reading people. Story 48. Worked at Hooters for a summer in college. The uniform was okay because I was a competitive cheerleader and dancer, so I was used to it. We had to wear different shirts and colors on certain days, and I always forgot, so I had to buy a new one every time, which got expensive. Tips ranged from $0 to $500. One customer gave a coworker $20 because he liked her eyeliner. The hourly wage was very low and the hours were worse. We were always understaffed, so we worked 10 to 12-hour shifts 6 days in a row with only a 30-minute break. If you had to use the restroom, someone had to cover your tables. At my store, the women were petty and there was a lot of drama. Most either went into stripping or got pregnant. 90% of the customers were creepy. We had regulars who would nurse a Diet Coke for 8 hours just to sit with their favorite waitress. The worst one used to follow a girl to her car every night and we had to call the police. I forgot to mention we had a yearly golf tournament where the women were auctioned off to be caddies. Only the prettiest women who made the most money got to be caddies, and the rest had to run the side games. I was stuck doing the dunk tank in 50-degree weather. Story 49. I worked at a less revealing Twin Peaks with a fun country twist. Shout out to the owner, who was in the mob and is now in jail. My coworkers were amazing. The restaurant was open until 4 a.m., so there was always some drama. The general managers and bouncers always had the employees' backs no matter what. I was sexually assaulted by a customer when I was very young and was in shock. The bouncers detained him and called the police before I even grasped what had happened. I made a lot of money, so that was a benefit. Story 50. I worked at a restaurant in Texas similar to Hooters. It opened my eyes to how little some men see women as people. Men in business casual on lunch breaks would try to pull at the servers' bikinis. Would a man do this at work? Some men assumed they could touch you. Some older regulars acted like everyone's grandfather and tried to get close. I also saw many incidents of illegal behavior. Customers holding staff until the silverware was rolled, and screaming at 18-year-old employees until they cried. I was surprised how many people were okay bringing their young sons to places like this. I rarely saw daughters brought. I cannot imagine someone bringing their 8-year-old daughter to Tallywhackers, yet people would bring a peewee baseball team to celebrate a win. Story 51. I loved working at Hooters and worked at 3 different locations. I wish I could still work there. I earned good money but had to deal with many comments. We had event nights where you could participate and wear your uniform, and do not forget to take care of business. Story 52. Going on 41 years with that uniform. Shout out to the first Hooters in Clearwater, Florida. The second one is in Port Richey, Florida. You can dock your boat and order. Just saying. Story 53. I worked at the second location of Wing House in the early 2000s for a few years while in college. It was essentially Hooters, but our uniforms were black bottoms and a black tank top with white and red lettering. I had a blast. We regularly hosted a local radio station for liquid lunch, did wing deliveries to local businesses, dressed up for holidays, had minor celebrities in for photo opportunities, and so on. The best part of the job was making my rent in tips during the first week of the month and then just spending the rest of the month as I pleased. The worst part was getting wing sauce everywhere on every shift and the lame pickup lines men would try. Also the creepy older men who tried to touch you. Other than that, though, it was fun. Story 54. The fact that men think we like them when we are just at work and have entire lives at home remains sad. If you bet on your wife, you would have sex more. Ding dongs. I regularly made $1,000 a night in my best days. Story 55. I worked at Hooters for a year and a half. It was my first job as a waitress and I loved it. I even entered the bikini pageant and reached the semifinals. Story 56. I worked at Hooters for about a year and a half after I turned 18. To this day, it is one of the most fun jobs I have had. I made some really good friends. The uniform did not bother me. In reality, it was just a low-cut tank top and short shorts. I did not like that it was very cold during winter and we could not wear jackets because of the uniform. It paid well for someone fresh out of school and recently moved out. I was working there while in a long-term relationship and I am still with him, so it did not cause many problems. Story 57. I worked at Showme's in college and it was so fun. I am still friends with many of the women I worked with. When I worked there, they had 16 franchises. Now it looks like they have 2. I wore the black top with red or blue shorts uniform. Tights made it feel like you were wearing more than you were. I didn't mind. We had cute jackets for colder months. I still have some uniforms in a tote in the basement. We often joked around with guests when we were bored. Our managers were fairly large men, and a lot of city police liked to hang out at our location. I have pictures of us riding around in a police side-by-side vehicle. I never felt unsafe there except once, when a drunk man screamed at me for not giving him my number and tried to hit me. My manager intervened and afterward told me to give creeps a fake number. I made a lot of money during the warmer months. Winters were much slower. My best weekend, I walked out with $2,000 across 3 shifts. Story 58. I worked at a casino as a cocktail waitress, wearing short shorts and corset-style tops. We were paid to come in early to do our makeup. Our contracts allowed us to be fired if we gained more than 5 pounds. Working a service industry job that capitalizes on your sexuality feels like it walks the line of sex work. I would do it again in a heartbeat. I worked 3 days per week and took home over $100,000. Story 59. My former partner was caught with photos of women leaving their workplace. Be careful if you decide to go into this line of work. Story 60. It was terrible. I was 19, just a naive college student. Customers felt entitled and harassed me. A regular once offered to buy me a car if I slept with him. During a show, one of my breasts popped out of a dress I had borrowed, and I was mortified. The atmosphere was full of uncomfortable vibes. Some of the other girls were neither kind nor mature. Never again. Story 61. I work as a waitress at a nightclub. Our uniform is a see-through skirt with safety shorts that show a bit of the buttocks. As long as we wear the skirt, we can choose to wear anything from micro bikini tops and bras to full tops. It is up to each girl, but most of us wear bras or bikinis. I tend to wear the most revealing outfit among my coworkers, and I love it. People often do not realize that after running around a club for 9 hours you get very hot and sweaty, so being lightly dressed is actually practical. As long as it is not forced on me, I am happy to wear micro bikinis while serving customers. I receive generous tips, stay comfortable rather than clammy, and get compliments throughout my shift. What more could I ask for? Story 62. I am not a woman, but I worked at a gay bar during my last 2 years of college, so I thought that perspective might be interesting. The crew was a mix of muscular straight men from the military and fitness-obsessed gay men, so the bar's appeal was the staff. Starting on Friday night, the weekends required staff to be shirtless. Some were encouraged to wear only jockstraps. I started out serving drinks. Most men would not try anything physical against someone larger than themselves, but they bombarded us with sexual comments. Bachelorette parties were completely unhinged. I have never been cornered, grabbed, or fondled more in my life than by drunk white women who felt safe in that space. We sometimes had to stand there and take it because you cannot just push a woman away the way you can a man. I made a lot of money in tips because of the clientele. I had a blast, but I eventually moved to bartending. You have more power over people when you are the one pouring their drinks and can cut them off if they are being abusive. Story 63. I worked at Hooters as my first job. The money was good for a while and I enjoyed it at the time. Looking back after several years, I realized how degrading it could be. Customers sometimes treated me entirely inappropriately, asking me to put tips in my bra or shorts and squealing because I was the youngest woman working there, just 18 years old. You get some of the lowest people and, oddly enough, some men who were too afraid to go to a strip club. Management was terrible and did not protect us. Because it was corporate, the customer is always right attitude overrode our comfort. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.